3 weeks before my son's promotion dinner, he called on a Tuesday evening to tell me he hadn't put my name on the guest list. I was in the kitchen at the time, stirring a pot of split pea soup I'd been making since noosin, my mother's recipe, written on a card I've had since 1987. I kept stirring while he talked. "The Hargreaves are hosting it at their place," he said, "and they've really kept it tight. Colleagues, close family, that kind of thing." He paused. "You'd feel out of place, Mom. It's a different world over there." I set the wooden spoon on the rest beside the stove. I told him I understood. I told him to enjoy his evening, and then I hung up. I stood in my kitchen in Hamilton, looking at the photograph on the shelf above the window. Chester. That same photo I've had there since the November morning I came home from the hospital without him. He was smiling in it the way he always smiled, a little sideways, like he was in on a joke you hadn't heard yet. I turned off the burner. I went to the filing cabinet in the spare room, the second drawer. Behind the property tax receipts and the car maintenance records, there was a brown folder with a rubber band around it. I hadn't opened it in 8 years. I took it out. I held it in both hands for a moment. Then I called my lawyer. "My name is Florence. I'm 63 years old, and I've lived in Hamilton, Ontario, for nearly my whole life. The same 2-story on Gage Avenue that Chester and I bought for $167,000 in 1994, when the neighborhood was still catching its breath and someone 2 doors down kept chickens in the backyard. The chickens are long gone. The neighborhood has changed. The house hasn't. Chester was an electrician, a good one, the kind who showed up on time, cleaned up after himself, and never padded a quote. He drove the same white van for 16 years. He made the best butter chicken in Hamilton, which is a bold claim in a city with as many good kitchens as this one, and he never once raised his voice at me in 26 years of marriage. He died of a heart attack on a Wednesday afternoon in the parking lot of a Home Depot in Stony Creek. He was 52. He never met his granddaughter. After Chester died, I went back to work the following Monday. My manager told me to take as much time as I needed. I told him I needed to be useful. We compromised on a week. I spent 21 years as a loans officer at Hamilton Community Credit Union, the last 9 as senior commercial loans officer. I know how to read a financial statement. I know how to read people even better. My son was 24 when his father died. He was living in Toronto by then, working his first real job, junior analyst at a small commercial real estate firm on King Street. He drove back to Hamilton the same evening I called him. He sat at the kitchen table for 3 days and barely said a word. That's how he grieved, quietly, internally, like water finding its level. I let him be. Some people need to be held. My son has always needed room. He met my daughter-in-law at a networking event in Toronto's financial district. He was 29. She was 27, finishing her MBA at Rotman and already moving through rooms the way people do when they've been taught since childhood that rooms exist for them. She had perfect manners, the kind that feel like a locked door, polished on the surface, nothing behind them for someone like me. The first time I met her, she shook my hand and said, "Damon tells me you worked at a credit union. That must have been steady work." Not what was that like. Just steady work. As if I'd spent my career watching a clock instead of approving millions of dollars in commercial loans for businesses across the Hamilton-Wentworth region. I smiled. I asked her about Rotman. She talked for 11 minutes. "Let me tell you about the Hargreaves. My son's father-in-law was 66 when I first met him, at the engagement dinner held at a restaurant in Yorkville. He had silver hair, a handshake designed to remind you he was taller than you, and the confidence of a man who had decided to forget that he'd started out flipping bungalows in Etobicoke in the early 90s. By the time I met him, he was the founder and CEO of Hargreaves Properties, Inc., a mid-sized development firm with condo projects across the GTA. He wore a Rolex and talked about cap rates with the easy authority of someone who expected to be impressed. My son's mother-in-law ran the foundation that bore the family name. She organized charity luncheons and wore silk scarves to casual dinners and was gracious in the way that costs nothing and commits to nothing. At the engagement dinner, my son's father-in-law looked across the table and said, "Finance, I respect that. Approving car loans must teach you how people really live." He smiled. The table laughed. That particular laugh that signals everyone has been included except the person being dismissed. I took a sip of water. I said, "Mostly commercial loans, actually. Real estate development, among other things." He nodded the way people nod when they're already composing their next sentence. "Still," he said, "a credit union. That's very community-minded." My son looked at his bread plate. The wedding was at a restored property in Caledon, the kind of venue that costs more per square meter than the houses I grew up around. My son's mother-in-law coordinated the florals. I was asked for my table preference 2 days before the event, which told me exactly where I stood on the planning list. I was seated near the back beside a woman. I didn't know who turned out to be the caterer's contact. The head table was Hargreaves on one side, the couple in the center, and 2 empty seats on the other side where I might reasonably have sat. During the family photographs, the photographer gathered the Hargreaves around the couple. I stood to the side until one of my son's old university friends, a young man I'd met twice, said, "Shouldn't his mum be in this one?" They made room. I stood at the edge of the frame. I have never seen that photograph displayed in my son's house. My son gave a toast. He thanked the Hargreave family for their warmth and their generosity. He said he finally understood what it meant to have a real family foundation beneath you. He did not mention his father. He did not mention me. I told myself it was his day. I told myself that a good mother makes room. But there is a difference between making room and being erased. I knew the difference, even if my son had started to lose track of it. He took a position at Hargreave Properties the following year, project manager, then development lead, then, 5 years later, vice president of acquisitions. Good title, good salary, the kind of salary I could estimate within 10% based on comparable GTA positions. He and my daughter-in-law bought a house in Leaside, 4 bedrooms, a 2-car garage, the kind of neighborhood where the park has a dog washing station. The visits became less frequent, monthly, then quarterly, then we'll get up to Hamilton when things slow down. My granddaughter, Juniper, she'll be 4 in November, knows my voice on FaceTime better than she knows my face. When I visited at Christmas, she called my daughter-in-law's mother Grandma and called me by my first name. Nobody corrected her. I kept a notebook. Small green cover, the kind they sell at Staples for $2.50. I wrote down every date I called my son, every time he answered, every time it went to voicemail. Over 2.5 years, I recorded 39 outgoing calls, 12 answered. The other 27 went to voicemail. I left a message every time. I'm a loans officer. I track what people owe, even when they've stopped counting. But this was not a ledger. Now I need to go back. 8 years back, before the wedding, before any of it. My son had been working at a small firm when his now father-in-law met him at a conference and took notice. But before any of that, before my son had set foot inside a Hargreave Properties office, the company was in serious trouble. The project was a 12-story mixed-use building on a site near Dundas and Ossington in Toronto. Good location. The bones were sound. But the financing had gone sideways. The original lender had pulled back after a covenant breach related to pre-sale targets, and 2 chartered banks had declined to step in mid-construction. Hargreave Properties was sitting on a half-built building and a gap of $295,000 in bridge financing that needed to close within 60 days or the project would tip into receivership. I knew because a colleague of mine, a woman I'd worked alongside at the credit union for 12 years, who had since moved to a commercial lending desk at a chartered bank, mentioned it to me in passing. "Hargreave Properties is in a bind," she said. "Good company, bad timing." She didn't ask me to do anything with the information. She was just talking. But I knew that project. I'd driven past the site on one of my trips to Toronto. I'd looked up the development application, read the planning approvals, studied the Dundas-Ossington corridor studies the city had published. The location was strong. The unit mix was right for the market. The shortfall was a timing problem, not a structural one. I had seen this before in 30 years of commercial lending. This was a good business having a cash flow problem. I had $295,000 available. Chester's life insurance, $200,000. I had invested steadily over 11 years in index funds held in a self-directed RRSP. I'd also received $68,000 from the sale of my parents' property in Ancaster after my mother passed. The rest was what you accumulate when you live carefully, keep no car loan, and never spend money just because someone else is spending more. I had no mortgage. My credit union pension would cover retirement. The money was sitting there, doing what patient money does. I called my lawyer. Her name is Ann Shepard. She's been practicing in Hamilton for 30 years and handled Chester's estate, my will, and the Ancaster property sale. I told her I wanted to provide bridge financing to a Toronto development company without my name attached to any public document. Ann didn't ask why. She'd known me long enough. She incorporated a numbered company under the Ontario Business Corporations Act, 2247891 Ontario Inc. Ann was the sole director on the public record. My name did not appear in any filing. Under a unanimous shareholders agreement, I held 100% of the shares, with specific financial rights and consent requirements built in. Ann negotiated the loan terms with Hargreaves Properties Counsel. The bridge financing agreement was 6 pages. I read every line. The key provisions: 2247891 Ontario Inc. would provide $295,000 in bridge financing at a fixed rate of 6.5% per annum, secured by a second charge on the property. Repayment within 18 months of project completion. A confidentiality clause: no disclosure of the lender's identity without written authorization from 2247891 Ontario Inc. My son's father-in-law signed the agreement within 4 days of receiving it. He didn't negotiate hard. He was 60 days from losing the project, and the money had appeared when no bank would touch him. The building was completed. The pre-sales cleared. The loan was repaid in full with interest, $346,750, received over 2 disbursements. I put the money back into my RRSP. It compounded quietly. My name remained nowhere. My son went to work for Hargreaves Properties 2 years after that project closed. He didn't know his mother had provided the financing that kept his future father-in-law's company out of receivership. He didn't know because I never told him. I invested because the numbers made sense, and because I wanted the ground under my son to be solid, even if he never knew I had poured the concrete. The irony is specific. Every paycheck my son earned at Hargreaves Properties, every bonus, the Leaside house, the benefits package, the quarterly dinners where the Hargreaves treated him like one of their own. All of it traces back to 60 days in October when a numbered company in Hamilton bailed out a deal that 2 chartered banks had refused. And every year at Christmas, my daughter-in-law mentioned how grateful they were to have 2 wonderful families supporting them. She was counting one. After the phone call, after he told me I'd feel out of place, I stood in the spare room with that brown folder in my hands. I opened it. The bridge financing agreement. Ann's cover letter. The repayment confirmation from Hargreaves Properties Counsel. 8 years of clean, quiet invisibility. What I wanted was not revenge. I have never been built for revenge. Chester used to say, I had the patience of someone who had spent her whole career waiting for the numbers to tell the truth. He was right. What I wanted was simple. I wanted to exist. I wanted to stop being a convenience my son managed from a distance. A FaceTime call at Christmas, a birthday card with a gift card inside. A woman who was welcome when the occasion was casual but not when it mattered. I called Ann the following morning. Ann, I said, I need you to pull the 2247891 file. A silence then. Florence, are you sure? I've been sure for 8 years. I was just waiting to see if it would matter. I drove to her office on King Street West. Wooden floors, filing cabinets that go back to the 80s, a receptionist who has been there longer than I have been a client. Ann had the folder out on her desk when I arrived. We spread the agreement across the surface, 6 pages. Ann's initials on every page. My son's father-in-law's signature at the bottom, next to a line that read 2247891 Ontario Inc., per its authorized representative. Anne's name there, not mine. I asked Anne to prepare two things. First, a presentation copy of the financing agreement in a frame. She knew a framing shop on Lock Street that handled documents properly. Dark wood frame, glass front, the key clauses visible, both signatures at the bottom, and the date from 8 years ago. Second, my written authorization, signed and witnessed, waiving the confidentiality clause for a single, one-time disclosure. If anyone questioned my right to reveal myself, the paperwork would be there, clipped behind the frame's backing. "This one's on me," Anne said, gathering the papers. "I've been looking at this file for 8 years, wondering when you'd do something with it." I wrote the card that evening, 3 drafts. The first explained too much. The second was angry, words like ashamed and overlooked that were true but cheap. I tore them both up. The third was right. "Dear Damon and Verity, congratulations on 5 years at Hargreaves Properties and on the vice presidency. You've both worked hard, and it shows. There is something I've kept quiet for 8 years, and I think it's time to stop keeping it. I am the sole shareholder of 2247891 Ontario Inc., the numbered company that provided $295,000 in bridge financing to Hargreaves Properties Inc. In October of that year, when 2 banks had declined and the Dundas-Ossington project was 60 days from receivership. I was repaid in full with interest. I never told anyone. I never asked for anything in return. The framed agreement is your copy. I have never exercised my rights under that agreement. I have never interfered with a single decision your family made. I trusted you all with my money and with my silence. Love doesn't disappear because no one acknowledges it. But it shouldn't have to stay invisible either. All my love, Mum." I sealed it. I drove to a stationery shop on James Street North and chose the wrapping paper carefully, a deep burgundy, almost the color of old wine, with a pressed gold pattern in the stock. Gold ribbon. A small cream envelope for the card, tucked inside the box. The Hargreaves hosted the celebration at their home in Rosedale. The house was what you'd expect. A late Victorian on a street where the trees have been growing since before anyone in that dining room was born. A caterer. A florist. A photographer my son's mother-in-law had hired to document the evening in the style of the occasions she had been hosting for 30 years. The guest list was 40 people. Company executives, a few long-standing clients, close family. Not large enough to be public. Large enough to matter. I called a courier. Same-day delivery to a Rosedale address. $48. The package left Hamilton at 2 in the afternoon. I tracked it once, confirmed delivery at 4:30, and put my phone face down on the kitchen table. Chester's photograph on the shelf, that sideways smile. "Well," I told him, "it's done." At the Hargreaves house, dinner ended around 8. The caterer cleared the plates. My son's mother-in-law brought the gifts to the table. A Hargreaves tradition, she had explained years ago, because it is gracious to acknowledge generosity in front of those who offered it. There were perhaps 12 packages. My son and my daughter-in-law opened them one at a time. A first edition book of Pacific Northwest photography, a case of Niagara on the Lake Chardonnay, a weekend at a lodge in Muskoka. Each gift said, "We are people who give beautiful things to people who already have beautiful things." The burgundy package was near the end. Several guests had noticed it through the evening. The weight of the paper, the depth of the color. "Someone has taste," one of them had said when a server moved it slightly on the table. My daughter-in-law picked it up. She turned it over, looking for a tag. Nothing. She untied the gold ribbon carefully, set it on the table, pulled the wrapping off in a single clean sheet. Inside the box, a framed document, dark wood, glass front, 6 pages reduced to 1, the key clauses visible, 2 signatures at the bottom. One of them clearly my son's father-in-law's, and a date from 8 years ago. She held it up, tilted it toward the light. "What is this?" She read the title aloud, Bridge Financing Agreement, 2247891 Ontario Inc. and Hargreaves Properties Inc. Her expression shifted. She looked at my son. He leaned forward. I have no idea who sent that. Then she found the envelope. Small, cream, no name. She set the frame against a wine glass. It leaned there, patient, and opened the card. She began to read aloud. 40 people in a Rosedale dining room. And she read it the way people do when they're on social autopilot, before they understand what the words are saying. She reached the third paragraph. I am the sole shareholder of 2247891 Ontario Inc., the numbered company that provided $295,000 in bridge financing to Hargreaves Properties Inc., when 2 banks had declined and the project was 60 days from receivership. Her voice slowed. She looked up at her father. He was sitting at the head of the table, holding a glass of Bordeaux, and the color had left his face the way color leaves a room when the light goes out. A man seated 2 chairs away, a developer who had been in the GTA real estate market for 30 years, said, very quietly, 2247891 Ontario Inc. That's the Dundas-Ossington Bridge loan. That project would have gone into receivership without that money. My daughter-in-law kept reading. Her voice had dropped. I trusted you all with my money and with my silence. The table was completely still. The caterer was in the kitchen. There was no sound except my daughter-in-law's voice, finishing the last lines. Love doesn't disappear because no one acknowledges it. But it shouldn't have to stay invisible either. She stopped, a breath. All my love, Mum. Mum! 1 syllable. It sat in the room like a question nobody wanted to answer. My son stood up. His chair scraped back against the hardwood. He looked at the framed agreement. He looked at the card in his wife's hand. Then he looked at his father-in-law. His father-in-law had set down his wine glass. He reached across the table, took the frame, and turned it over. He found my signed authorization clipped to the backing. He read it. His hands were not entirely steady. The developer 2 seats away said, to no one in particular, he told his mother she'd feel out of place. The woman who saved the company. It was not a whisper. My son walked down the hallway and through the front door onto the Rosedale sidewalk. He stood under the old maples and called my number. I know this because he told me later. I was in Hamilton, cup of tea on the table, Chester on the shelf. My phone rang. I looked at the name on the screen. I let it ring 3 times. Then I answered. Mum. His voice was tight in the way voices get when someone has been holding themselves together in a room full of people and has just stepped outside. Mum, what did you do? Good evening, sweetheart. That document, Hargreaves Properties. You're the lender? I was. Why didn't you tell me? I thought about that for a moment. I looked at Chester's photograph. Because the investment made sense, and I didn't do it for credit. I did it because you were walking into that company, and I wanted the foundation under you to be solid. Mum, his voice broke slightly. Why tonight? Why like this? Because you told me I'd feel out of place at your own celebration. So, I thought your father-in-law should understand at least, who has been sitting quietly on his balance sheet for 8 years. Silence, the street behind him, a city continuing regardless. He's furious. I imagine he has a complicated set of feelings. You've embarrassed everyone. I was quiet for a moment, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted to say it properly. Damon, I didn't embarrass anyone. I told the truth. If the truth is uncomfortable, that's not mine to manage. He had nothing for that. You told me I'd feel out of place, I said. Do you know what I felt when you said that? I felt like a file that's been closed and put away, like someone who served her purpose and could stop taking up space. That is not what I raised you to do to people. And it is certainly not what your father would have recognized in you. A long silence, the maple leaves probably, October air. I don't know what to say. I know, you don't have to say it tonight. I paused. Come and see me when you're ready. You know where I live. You always have. I hung up. I washed the soup pot. Chester on the shelf, that sideways smile. You would have found a cleaner way, I told him. You always were better with people than I am. But I think it was the right thing. I went to bed at 10. I slept better than I had in months. That surprised me a little, but it shouldn't have. I had been carrying that folder for 8 years. Setting it down is lighter than you think. Saturday morning, I was in the backyard deadheading the roses when a car pulled into the driveway. Not the leased Audi that Hargreaves Properties provides him, his own car. The old Civic he's had since graduate school, the one he keeps in the garage and drives when he's not performing anything for anyone. He drove his own car to Hamilton. That told me everything before he said a word. He looked like he hadn't slept. He came through the gate and stood on the lawn, and for a moment he simply looked at me. The way people look when they're trying to find where to begin. I set down the garden scissors. "Come inside. I'll make coffee." He sat at the kitchen table. The same table where he did his grade 9 algebra. The same table where we ate sandwiches after Chester's funeral and didn't say much. He put his hands flat on the surface, palms down. I remembered that. He always did that when he was concentrating hard. "I'm sorry, Mom." I looked at my son. 35 years old, gray beginning at his temples, his father's hands. I know the difference between sorry for what you did and sorry for getting caught. He was still somewhere between the two. But he had driven from Toronto to Hamilton on a Saturday morning in his old Civic, and that was not nothing. "Damon!" I sat down across from him. "I love you. That is not a thing that changes regardless of what you do with it. But I am your mother, not an inconvenience to be managed, not someone you apologize for because her job title doesn't match the room." I let that settle. I will never use that financing agreement against Hargreaves Properties. I never have, and I have no intention of starting. But I will not pretend I don't exist so you can be comfortable at someone else's table. He stared at the wood grain, his hands flat, concentrating. If the people in that house are worth your loyalty, they're worth knowing the truth about who has been in their corner. And if that truth unsettles them, that is not my problem to solve. He nodded. Not an explanation, not a justification, just a nod. Sometimes that is the most honest thing a person can offer. I poured him coffee. Black, 2 sugars. The way Chester drank it and the way my son learned to drink it at 16 when he was trying to seem older than he was. We sat at the kitchen table for an hour. We talked about Juniper starting at a new daycare. We talked about the roses needing cutting back before the first frost. We talked about whether the Ticats had any hope this season, which they don't, but we talked about it anyway. 6 weeks later, my son's father-in-law sent a letter, through Anne, addressed formally to 2247891 Ontario Inc., acknowledging the bridge financing provided to Hargreaves Properties Inc. and inviting the company's representative to the annual stakeholders meeting in March. He signed it himself. The letter was professional. It was not warm. But it was the first time he had communicated with me directly in 8 years, even if he was still learning how to spell my last name. My son calls on Sunday evenings now. 15 minutes, sometimes 20. He asks about the garden. He told me last week that Juniper had been asking to come to Hamilton. He said it that way. She wants to see Grandma in Hamilton. My daughter-in-law texted me a photograph last month. Juniper at the kitchen table in Leaside, wearing an apron, pressing cookie cutters into rolled dough. The text said only, "She asked if this is how you do it. Nothing else." But she sent it, and I put it on the refrigerator where I can see it from the stove. It is not a resolution. It is a beginning. The difference matters. Chester's photograph is still on the shelf above the kitchen window, still smiling, still sideways. The frame is slightly crooked. He hung it himself the week we moved in, and I have never straightened it. Some things you leave the way the person you loved put them. Not because you can't change them, because you choose not to. That is my story. 8 years of a folder in a filing cabinet, a numbered Ontario company in Anne's files, and a burgundy package delivered to a Rosedale address on a Friday afternoon. I didn't threaten anyone. I didn't exercise a single clause. I just stopped letting the truth sit in a drawer because it was easier for other people if it stayed there. Love doesn't need an audience, but it shouldn't have to file itself away and wait to be noticed. If someone in your life makes you feel like you need to disappear so they can fit in somewhere, remember this: the people who truly love you will never ask you to be invisible. And the ones who do, they might want to take a careful look at who has been quietly holding the foundation together. Thank you for being here. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below and subscribe to Fierce Mom Stories. I'll see you in the next one.